The SMART text discusses how there are many culturally sanctioned celebrations within our society that mark the passage of time. For example, we celebrate graduations, quinceañeras, and birthdays, weddings, and even the loss of a tooth. It's even become more appropriate in our society to celebrate things like divorce, something which probably wouldn't be sanctioned within our culture 50 years ago. Unfortunately, for many people with disabilities, these cultural norms are something that are not expected of them, or sometimes they're not achieved. For example, here's an article noting the first couple with Down syndrome married in Britain. Unfortunately, this article is covering the death of the wife. However, what's noteworthy here is that they were married in 2004. Only 11 years ago, and they were the first couple with Down syndrome to be married in Britain. This is just one example of how individuals with disabilities are impacted in terms of their development across the lifespan. The Council for Disability Awareness has a website, www.disabilitycanhappen.org. This site is aimed at encouraging people to obtain disability insurance. I encourage you to visit the site and explore it and think about its benefits and also whether it may have any unintended consequences for individuals with disabilities. This website also has a link to a disability awareness quick quiz. I encourage you to pause the video now, explore the website, and take this quiz. Disability is a normative and natural experience, yet the general public doesn't see it that way. According to the Council on Disability Awareness's 2014 Consumer Disability Awareness Study, workers often miscalculate the relative risk of obtaining a disability. The actual likelihood of obtaining a disability throughout one's working career is actually 25%. The blue bars in these figures represent the percentage of people who saw each of the events as more likely to occur than a disability. Remember, the likelihood of obtaining a disability across one's working career is 25%. The orange bars represent the actual chance of each event occurring. So, 27% of survey respondents thought that they were more likely to be audited by the IRS than to obtain a disability across their working career. The actual likelihood of being audited by the IRS is 1%. The likelihood of obtaining a disability across one's career is 25%. Similarly, 17% of respondents thought that they were more likely to have twins than to obtain a disability across their career, when the actual likelihood of having twins is only 3%. 16% responded that they'd be more likely to get a hole-in-one on any given shot, when the likelihood is only 0.008%. 15% of individuals thought that they would be more likely to win the Mega Millions than to obtain a disability, when the likelihood is actually only 0.00004%. 11% thought that they'd be more likely to be struck by lightning. Actual likelihood of being struck by lightning is only 0.02%. And 11% thought that they'd be more likely to become president. The actual likelihood is 0.02%. I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on this excerpt from the SMART text. Disability also presents another dimension, the concept of normality. Without doubt, disabilities often involve functional losses. Disability is expensive, requires management, and is difficult. However, disability is not as tragic as most people without disabilities think. Disabilities appear to be an assault on Americans' glorification of health, vigor, autonomy, freedom, and individualistic self-reliance. Disability makes people without disabilities uncomfortable because it is a visual reminder that anyone can acquire a disability at any time. Take a moment now, pause the video, and reflect on this passage. Also think about how it might relate to the data presented on the previous slide. Terror management theory posits that the human need to deny mortality underlies many social behaviors and motivations, such as reactions to people with disabilities. This 2005 study examined people's compassionate responses to individuals with disabilities based on terror management theory. The researchers hypothesized that for the groups where mortality was made salient prior to completing a scale on compassion towards individuals with disabilities, would have less compassionate responses than those who were either exposed to a failure salience condition or a neutral condition. Mortality salience was achieved by having participants read and write about thoughts of their own death. Failure salience was achieved by having participants read and write about thoughts about failing an exam. For women, there was no difference in compassion across any of the three groups towards individuals with disabilities. You can tell this because of the tiny subscript A next to each of the means. Because all of the subscripts are A's, this means there's no difference between the three groups. For men, you can see that mortality salience resulted in the lowest mean compassion rating compared to failure salience and neutral conditions. Again, look at the subscripts. For the mortality salience mean in the men's category, the subscript is an A. For failure salience, it is a B, and for neutrality, it is a B. Therefore, there's no difference between the failure salience and neutral conditions. However, the lower compassion scores were present for the mortality salience conditions. What these results tell us is that for men, terror management theory may play some role in how they respond to individuals with disabilities. Keep in mind that this is just one study. We need to have multiple studies with identical findings to confirm terror management theory's relevance in reactions to people with disability. There are three factors that are currently at play bringing people with disabilities into American culture. First is the population explosion of people with disabilities. Think about reasons for this population explosion. One might be the aging population. Another might be the number of veterans returning home from war with disabilities. A third might be improvements in health care that are allowing individuals to live longer and therefore increasing likelihood that people experience disability across their lifetime. Additionally, people with disabilities have moved away from stigma management or avoiding stigma into a political identity group. This happened along with the civil rights movement. Finally, the media has made strides in changing its portrayal of people with disabilities. Improvement is still needed, but indeed there have been changes. The SMART text talks about 6 developmental stages, and we will discuss how each of these developmental stages might be impacted by the experience of disability. These stages are pregnancy and infancy, toddlerhood and early childhood, school age, adolescence, adult and midlife, the young elderly, and the old elderly. Take a moment and pause the video. Think about what ways the developmental stages might be affected for people with disabilities. This is a table from the SMART text which outlines the ways in which developmental stages are affected by disability. Take some time to review this table now. There are 3 major theories of adaptation or adjustment to disability: the stage model, the social moratorium or timeout, and the cognitive restructuring model. First, it's important to understand the difference between adaptation and adjustment. Livna and Antonuk define this definition or this difference in that adaptation is the process and adjustment is the final state of maximum person-environment fit. Here we look at it another way, adaptation as the continuum and maladjustment at one end of the continuum as being poor adjustment, and adjustment at the other end of the continuum being good adjustment. We can see that there are characteristics associated with both maladjustment and adjustment. Individuals who are experiencing maladjustment to disability may experience anxiety, depression, anger, negative self-esteem, social withdrawal, or denial of chronic illness and disability. Those who are well-adjusted experience independence, interdependence, positive self-esteem, self-efficacy, personal mastery, and adaptive coping. Although adjustment and adaptation are commonly used phrases, and they will continue to be used in our discussions and in the SMART text, they're actually not the appropriate terminology to use. The appropriate term is response to disability, not adjustment or adaptation. Adjustment and adaptation pathologize disability. It implies that disability is automatically an undesirable experience that one must adjust or adapt to. The stage model of adjustment to disability contains stages similar to the stages of death and dying proposed by Kubler-Ross. This model proposes that individuals and families experience predictable stages in coming to terms with disability. However, there are differences between the stage model for response to disability and the stages of death and dying. First, response time. Oftentimes, individuals who are experiencing a reaction to death and dying had time to build up to their response. Oftentimes, individuals who acquire a disability don't have this time. Additionally, for the most part, people going through the stages of responses to death and dying do not experience prejudice and discrimination. However, individuals with disabilities do. The stages in the stage model of adjustment to disability include shock, denial, depression, regression, anger and personal questioning, and acceptance. These stages are not irreversible. In other words, somebody could experience regression and then later on experience again denial or shock. And not every stage is necessary. They're not hierarchical stages, which means that the preceding stage must not be fully resolved in order to move on to the next stage. The stage model is more applicable to physical than intellectual or psychiatric disabilities, although one could say that somebody may go through stages of reaction to the diagnosis of a psychiatric disability. Overall, the stage model is more useful for understanding reactions to physical disabilities that have a stable course. Take a moment and pause the video. Think about what each of these stages might look like in terms of adjustment to disability. Is there anything specific we should keep in mind as providers helping people with the adjustment process? There are some pros and cons to the stage model of adjustment to disability. Some of the pros are that it may help individuals and family members to understand the process. It may serve to normalize the experience. It could help in the development of treatment plans. It does emphasize the emotional impact of disability, something which may have previously been ignored. And it creates and justifies the need for disability counselors. Some of the drawbacks or criticisms of this model are that it's not useful for episodic, degenerating, or psychiatric disabilities, and that the response to disability is